Indispensability. The title of this blog, An Indispensable Person, might be considered controversial. That's because any number of very smart people would argue that there is, in fact, no such thing as an indispensable person. For example, according to both Presidents Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt, quote, "There is no indispensable man," unquote. Said President John F. Kennedy, quote, "Nobody's indispensable," unquote. Observed the redoubtable Charles de Gaulle, quote, "The graveyards are full of indispensable men," unquote. And there we have it. There is a school of thought that states without equivocation that no one, absolutely no one, no matter how anyone has painted someone's existence or value, is indispensable. It's a school of thought that I do not attend. That's because based on my reading of history, there are indeed certain individuals without whom certain positive historical ends could not have been achieved. Here are four obvious examples. James Thomas Flexner entitled his superb biography of George Washington, "The Indispensable Man." Flexner was correct in so titling his book because George Washington, 1732 to 1799, was in fact an indispensable person. Without his leadership and indomitable will, the American Revolution would have quickly unraveled and been lost. And without Washington, the American presidency, and with it, the nascent American democracy, would very likely have devolved into autocracy, perhaps even monarchy. This book should be required reading for a certain 6 members of our currently not terribly Supreme Court, who need desperately to be reminded of what the founders intended and what moral greatness looks like. I am loath to even consider what the United States would look like today if not for the indispensable moral guidance and eloquence of Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1865. As for the 20th century, the world as we know it would not exist, and the forces of darkness might very well have triumphed without the indispensable Winston Churchill, 1874 to 1965, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 1882 to 1945. The Prussian general and military theorist Karl von Clausewitz, 1780 to 1831, pinpointed the traits that leaders require to make them indispensable. Quote, 2 qualities are indispensable. First, an intellect that even in the darkest hour retains some glimmerings of the inner light which leads to truth. And second, the courage to follow this faint light wherever it may lead, unquote. Some perspective as we observe the obvious. The indispensable people of, say, the world of potash mining, of lip gloss manufacturing, and of shipping pallet design may not be as well known, and their impact on humanity not as universal as Washington's, Lincoln's, Churchill's, and Roosevelt's. But in terms of their fields, they are indispensable people as well. Without Howard T. Hallowell, 1877 to 1955, who patented the first shipping pallet in 1924, he called it a lift truck platform, the American trucking industry might never have gotten off the ground in the manner it did. Long live Howard T. Hallowell, the indispensable person of the shipping pallet. Another unsung hero, another indispensable person. We mark the death on July 15th, 1857, 167 years ago today, of the Austrian composer, pianist, chronicler of Beethoven, and teacher, Czerny. For all his various and extraordinary contributions, Czerny must be considered an indispensable person to Western music during the first half of the 19th century. For a full explanation as to why I consider Czerny to be as indispensable to the music and piano playing in the 19th century as George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Howard T. Halliwell were to their worlds and professions, join me, please, for my Music History Monday podcast entitled An Indispensable Person, which can be accessed on all podcast platforms, or enjoy the illustrated, full-text, ad-free version of this blog and much more on my Patreon channel.